In a small house at the end of a quiet street, a young woman went to sleep one night in a room locked from the inside. By morning, she was gone. The door was still locked. The window was still latched. And for 30 years, no one knew what had happened to her, until something was finally found that changed everything. Let's call her Emily. She was 26 years old, living alone in a small rented house on the edge of a town that hadn't changed much in decades. She worked as a school teacher. Well-liked by her students and respected by her colleagues, she had a small circle of close friends. A boyfriend she'd been seeing for about a year, and a habit of locking her bedroom door every night before bed, a routine she'd kept since she was a teenager living alone for the first time. It wasn't paranoia, it was just something she did. The same way some people check the stove twice before leaving the house. On the night in question, a Friday in late autumn, she had dinner with a friend, came home around 10, and texted her boyfriend goodnight just before 11. That was the last anyone heard from her. The next morning, when she didn't show up for a scheduled weekend brunch, her friend called repeatedly with no answer, then eventually drove to the house and let herself in with a spare key kept under a flower pot by the porch. Something only a handful of people knew about. The front door was locked. The back door was locked. When she reached Emily's bedroom, the door was locked too, from the inside. The old-fashioned kind of lock that could only be turned from within the room. After banging on the door and getting no response, the friend called the police, and they had to force the door open. The room was empty. The bed was slept in, sheets pulled back on one side as if she had simply gotten up in the middle of the night. Her phone was on the nightstand, still charged. Her shoes were by the door, her coat still hanging in the closet. Nothing appeared to be missing, aside from Emily herself. The single window in the room was latched shut from the inside, and it was small enough that investigators initially questioned whether an adult could even fit through it, let alone latch it again from outside afterward, which would have been physically impossible. This is what came to be known, at least among the small circle of investigators and later true crime enthusiasts who followed the case, as a locked room mystery, a phrase usually reserved for old detective novels, not real police reports. But this was real, and the details of that room genuinely did not add up. Investigators searched the entire house from top to bottom. They checked for hidden passages, secret panels, anything that might explain how someone could enter or exit a locked room without a trace. They found nothing unusual about the house's construction. It was an old building, more than 80 years old at the time, but no hidden doors, no crawl spaces connecting to the bedroom, nothing that would explain what had happened. The investigation that followed was thorough, at least by the standards of a small town with limited resources. Emily's boyfriend was questioned extensively, as boyfriends and partners typically are in cases like this. But his alibi held up. He had been at a friend's apartment across town until well past midnight, confirmed by multiple witnesses. Her co-workers were interviewed. Her students' families were spoken to, more as a formality than out of any real suspicion. No one had a motive. No one had access to that locked room. And still, she was gone. For the first few weeks, theories multiplied the way they always do in cases with no clear answer. Some believed she had staged her own disappearance and somehow left through the window despite its size, perhaps with help from someone outside who could relatch it, though no one could explain how that mechanism would even work from outside a small locked window. Others believed foul play was involved despite the locked door, theorizing that someone she knew and trusted had been let into the room earlier in the evening and left before she locked it, taking her with them by force sometime after, though this didn't explain the untouched bed or the fact that neighbors reported no unusual sounds that night, and the house sat close enough to others that a struggle would likely have been heard. A few, mostly amateur theorists rather than investigators, floated stranger ideas entirely, that she had let herself out through the front door for some reason, and simply vanished afterward, with the locked bedroom door being incidental rather than central to the mystery. Perhaps locked out of habit hours earlier and never actually slept in that night at all, despite the disturbed sheets. But this too fell apart under scrutiny, since forensic examination confirmed body heat traces consistent with someone having been in that bed for several hours that night. Weeks became months. The case remained open, but with no new leads. Media attention faded, and the file was eventually moved to cold case storage, one among many unresolved disappearances that small towns rarely have the resources to keep actively pursuing. Emily's parents, who had moved to be closer to the investigation in its early days, eventually returned to their previous home, though they kept in regular contact with the local police department for updates that, for years, never came. 30 years passed. The house itself changed hands twice over that time. Each new owner, unaware, or only vaguely aware through local rumor, of what had happened there decades earlier. The bedroom was repainted, the old latch on the window eventually replaced during a general renovation, and life in the small town moved on the way it always does. The story slowly fading from active memory into the kind of local legend told at bars and family gatherings, more myth than open case in most people's minds. Then, during a renovation project by the house's third owner, someone who had no connection to Emily's story, and had only heard vague rumors about something odd happening in the house years before they bought it. A contractor working on replacing old flooring in what had once been Emily's bedroom found something unexpected beneath the floorboards. It wasn't immediately clear what it was. It took investigators, once called back to the property after all these years, some time to determine that what had been found was linked directly to the case that had gone cold 3 decades earlier. Without getting into details that remain sensitive even now, what was discovered beneath that floor answered some of the central questions that had haunted the case for 30 years, while raising entirely new ones that investigators are still working through. It confirmed, first and foremost, that Emily had never actually left that room the way everyone assumed she must have. The locked door and the latched window, it turned out, had never been the mystery everyone believed them to be. The real mystery had been hiding directly beneath where she slept the entire time, missed by an investigation in an era before modern forensic technology could have detected what was eventually found. The case was formally reopened. New forensic techniques unavailable 30 years earlier were used to examine what had been recovered. And slowly, painstakingly, a picture began to form that finally gave Emily's now elderly parents something they had waited 3 decades for, not necessarily peace, but at least an answer. A version of events that made sense of a night that had defied explanation for their entire adult lives, raising a family without their daughter. What makes this case so unsettling, even now, isn't just the eventual discovery, but everything that came before it. 30 years of theories, investigations, and searches that all focused on how someone could have left a locked room, when the true answer had nothing to do with leaving at all. It's a reminder of how easily an investigation can be shaped by an assumption that seems logical on the surface, and how that single wrong assumption can send an entire case in the wrong direction for decades. The house still stands today, though its current owners, understandably, prefer not to discuss what was found beneath that bedroom floor. And the town itself has largely moved on from actively discussing the case, aside from the occasional true crime enthusiast who still visits. Drawn by a story that sat unsolved for so long, it became something closer to folklore before it became, once again, a very real and very tragic case with an actual resolution. For 30 years, people speculated about impossible escapes, secret passages, and elaborate deceptions, when the truth, as it so often does in cases like this, turned out to be something far simpler and far more devastating than anyone had imagined. Sometimes the most complicated-seeming mysteries don't have complicated answers at all. Sometimes they've simply been waiting, quietly, for someone to look in the one place no one thought to check. If you have theories about cases like this, or if you've heard of similar situations where an investigation's earliest assumptions ended up leading everyone away from the truth for years, share them, because these are exactly the kinds of details that sometimes crack cases wide open, even decades later. And if stories like this one interest you, real, unresolved mysteries eventually given an answer, told simply and respectfully, there are more waiting to be told.